So, thank you, Beverly, for joining us today on this segment.
Happy to be here.
Yeah, excellent. So, tell us a little bit more about the Right Choice Group.
Right Choice Group is a talent management and development organization, and one of the primary services we offer is coaching and leadership consulting.
Great, great. And a little bit about your background?
Well, I grew up professionally in a large technology company, IBM, and was there for over 30 years. The last assignment that I had before I retired was as talent management exec. And in that position, I was responsible for hiring, training, and professional development for 3 of our larger locations in Dallas, Atlanta, and Toronto.
Sounds like it kept you busy.
It kept me busy and very engaged, and so
Yeah.
it was a great training ground.
Very good. And of course, that's where I met you and
Absolutely.
how we made it to being here today.
Absolutely, and thanks for having me.
Yeah, great. Well, I'm very excited about the topics. They're things that I certainly am passionate about, and I know that you've had a lot of experience in. So why don't you tell us what we're going to talk about today?
One of the things that I learned both when I was in corporate America and as I've left and started my own company is that companies say that their employees are their most important asset, but they sometimes are challenged by how do they really operationalize that concept and how do they keep employees engaged. So that's what we're going to talk about today is how to leverage the return on people to increase your return on investment.
Very good, and it is something that I've thought about. I've heard the phrase so many times, and living and cutting my teeth within a corporation myself, it just seems like so many of the policies or decisions seem to undercut that idea of people being your most important asset. So very timely, and let's go ahead and just get started.
Absolutely. Well, first, let's talk about what employee engagement means. There are multiple definitions, as in any concept that you talk about, but one that I really like is that it is a emotional commitment that an employee makes with the company or organization. They're invested. And even though that may look different in different companies, that's really the crux of it, is that they feel good about being a part of the company, representing the company, and helping it to grow.
Yeah, that's an interesting definition. I've heard a lot of them, and I like the idea about the emotional commitment. And I also see why it's just more of a recent topic, because emotions, as you know, are sticky and messy, and companies don't tend to do very well with handling that.
Yeah, it's not quite black and white, and it's different for different organizations depending on their culture.
Sure.
So we're going to talk about that. There's, something to be said about, one, employees are the most expensive resource that any company could have.
Sure.
So that's another reason that companies should really be focused on this topic. It might not be where they write a check. They see the expense that's associated with it other than the salaries, but they also don't see the benefits they can derive if they really understand and focus on leveraging the return on people. So that's what we're going to really focus on today.
Perfect. So why don't you continue?
Well, I've done quite a bit of research on this, and there are lots and lots of surveys on this topic of employee engagement. A couple of the really compelling ones that I've seen, one recently for 2014 was Dale Carnegie, and they said that $11 billion, with a B, dollars are lost in turnover every year. Turnover is one of the main visible things that a company can track about their employee engagement. They also say that companies that have good employee engagement have a 202% increase over companies that don't have it. And so it's really expensive to not have it, and it's really beneficial to have more engaged employees.
Very good. And stop me if you're going to cover this in the later segments. But my understanding of employee engagement is that there's really multiple factors. And the first one you just covered is turnover. What are some of the other indicators or things that weigh into employee engagement?
Well, one of the book's titles that I like, book titles and quotes, and one of the ones that I heard, I think, speaks to the invisible cost of the lack of employee engagement. And the name of the book is I Quit, But I Forgot to Tell You. And it's because even more expensive are the people that don't leave your organization but aren't engaged. So they stay there. They show up every day. Their productivity is low. They may do just enough to get by, but there's no lack of innovation is one of the things that you see. And they just aren't, they don't have the heart and soul, that commitment we talked about earlier. is not there, and it shows up in multiple ways. One statistic that I heard was that when they surveyed employees and said, if you increased your productivity or decreased your productivity by 10%, would anyone notice? And they said no. So they really didn't feel any incentive to increase it because nobody would notice, and they felt that if they decreased it, nobody would notice even then, and so they could do that as well. And I think that's a pretty scary statistic.
Yeah, it's interesting. The last couple of things you said really indicate that there's sort of an invisible war or actions that are happening or not actions, right?
Sure.
So the book title,
Yeah.
I quit, but I didn't tell you.
Yeah.
I could do better or worse, and you wouldn't know.
Sure.
So it just seems like employee engagement is really about people feeling seen and heard, and some
Sure.
of the other things that I know we'll talk about.
Yeah, I think when I think about why companies should care about employee engagement, when you look at all of the factors that are affecting the workplace and the marketplace, so globalization is a big one. The multiple generations in the workplace, which is another big factor, and we might talk a little bit about what's different about the coming generations who are, over time, more and more going to be the pool that we have to draw from. If you talk about leadership in a company, where are the future leaders coming from, and how will they be trained?
Right.
All of those things are reasons that companies have to prepare now for what's coming. The 2020 Workplace is another book that I think is really interesting that would give companies a view of what they need to be doing now to prepare for the 2020 workplace, and employee engagement is really the foundation of that.
Okay. Good. Any other items in this segment that you'd like to talk
Well,
about?
the thing I'd like to end with is just to think about a really old Chinese proverb, because it really is true for everybody, and companies in particular. And it says that if you want to have 1 year prosperity, grow grain. If you want to have 10 years of prosperity, grow trees. But if you want to have 100 years of prosperity, grow people. So it takes us back to what we said at the beginning, which is your people are your biggest asset, so you should cultivate them carefully.
So very good. We'll start this next segment as a continuation about the timely topic of employee engagement. And it's funny, these are things that you know on some level, but you've never really put them into the words of employee engagement. And so the last couple of years, I'm starting to hear that term more and more. And the idea is, boy, if they're engaged, they're going to add more to the company, and the company's going to benefit. But there's not a lot of direction on how do you actually do that. And so let's talk a little bit about your experience and what you've learned about how to create a culture of engagement.
Well, I think that is a really good question, because when you talk about concepts, that's the reason they're called concepts, but then how do you make them real and concrete and implement them? And that's probably where the challenge comes in for company. There are many, many models. One that I like to create a culture of engagement is really to look at the components of what employees want from a company. Usually they certainly want training, especially when we start talking about the different generations. They want to be developed. And you can develop people in lots of ways, and it's beneficial to the company. Unfortunately, over the last probably couple of decades, companies want employees to come to them trained. And so that's become more of a challenge, because I consistently hear from employees, they kind of threw me out there and then I just had to kind of, sink or swim. And so they don't feel as prepared as they could to really engage with your customers, which I think might be a danger sign for. And I'm sure you've had that experience where you're
Sure.
talking to employees.
Sure, my mind is racing. I've experienced this firsthand
Sure.
on many levels. So I have worked at 3 Fortune 100 companies, and I've had the misfortune of getting into them at times where they were cutting back. And so things like employee development budgets and acquiring new skills, those just go out the window. They,
Sure.
they see that as a hard cost,
Sure.
and it gets eliminated. And yet on the HR releases that come out, employees are our number one asset, and we're treated often more like a liability.
Well, one of the examples that I experience all the time that from a training perspective is if you go to any fast food restaurant, go to the drive-through, order anything. I don't care what kind of food it is. Order anything. And once you get home and unpack whatever you bought, they've got 35 napkins, 15 packets of sauce.
Right.
And you didn't ask for any of that.
Sure.
Right? Somebody is paying for that. The company is paying for it. And literally, from a training perspective, I keep thinking, if they had just asked me, do you need napkins? Do you even use hot sauce? Which I don't.
Sure.
But I've thrown away plenty of it, right? Because I don't need it. And so it's a training failure to me that somewhere that message is not getting from the people that are paying for these resources,
Right.
these ingredients, and they're just wasting money because they're not even, and they're not pleasing the customer because they didn't even ask me and give me an opportunity to say, well, save that for the customer that really wants it, but it's a waste to me.
Sure.
And
so
so-
they left you at, do you want fries with that?
Exactly.
But
And
not, do you want
Yeah.
30 napkins and 3 extra
And I mean,
sauce?
it's so wasteful because, I mean, really mounds of napkins and ketchup and things that, I don't eat ketchup on my fries. Maybe I'm odd, but I don't. But I always get it because they never ask me. So that's just a really basic example of where training somehow is not, and it costs them money. I bet they could cut their budget for those items in half without even thinking about it if they just really changed the way they trained them and had a way to make sure that it took. And so that's the real cost of employee engagement. I mean, so training is a basic thing. One of the other things I hear from employees, and that's at all levels, so this is not just entry-level employees.
Sure.
This is even in the executive ranks where they, in some companies, they have a culture of centralized decision-making. And even at the executive level, sometimes they're not as involved in the decision-making as they'd like to be. No one's asking them, so what is the cost to the company? There's less innovation, because if someone that's so far removed from your customers in your geography, because some of that is regional.
Sure.
All of that's not, all customers in the South are not like all customers, in other parts of the country. And so the centralized decision-making where the people closest to the customer don't get invited to kind of make those decisions or at least have major input into them is also a way that you see employees become less engaged. I've heard executives say, well, I'm not going to work any harder, and they didn't ask me for my opinion, and when
Right.
I offered it, they disregarded it.
Sure.
It's starting to be more prevalent in the younger generations where that is one of the reasons that makes them start looking for another job.
Sure. They want more interaction. They want more of a
Exactly.
voice,
Exactly.
more meaning in what they're
Sure.
doing.
Meaning is a key word. So you said that, and I will tell you that I often talk to employees about the difference between their lives and their lifestyles. Because their jobs support their lifestyle.
Right.
More and more, the generations want the two things to be interrelated. They want their work to be worthwhile and to know that it counted for something. So it's a mixing of that life and lifestyle. And so that goes back to the conversation we had at the beginning about them being emotionally connected. They want to be able to be proud of what their company is contributing to society in some way.
Sure. So, and you and I have talked about this before. The newest generation in the workplace is the millennials.
Sure.
And do you want to expound a little bit more about some of the things you're hearing from them, maybe even some examples of how this plays out?
Sure. What I hear in general is that social responsibility is something they take very seriously, and they take it serious early in their careers. They want to work for companies that they think are making a contribution to both the marketplace and the community. And the sooner companies can involve them in that, the more opportunity they have to retain them. Most companies will tell you that where they're really having retention problems is with employees in that 0 to 3 years. Now, keep in mind, 0, that means they didn't make a year, right?
Gotcha.
And that is happening more often. So one story I can tell you about that from my careers when we were in the staffing business is that our managers would go to campus many times because we'd have college hire recruitment projects. And so one of the managers went to campus and they saw a young lady there that they really liked, but we didn't have any openings at the time. But they said to her, we'd love to stay in touch with you because we know we'll have openings shortly. And so we want to stay in touch because we really liked, what you have to offer and would like to have further conversation. She agreed.
Right.
So about 4 or 5 months later, we had openings, and so he contacted her again. And so she said, oh, let's just call him John. Oh, Mr. John, thank you so much for following up with me, but I just started training with the company where I've accepted the job. And so she said, and so I'm in training now, and I have a job, but I so appreciate you, staying in touch with me. So he said, oh, I'm really glad to hear that you found something. Sorry that, you didn't give
Right.
us an opportunity. So this happened in about November when he was October, November, having that conversation with her. But before they ended, she said, check back with me in January. By then, I'll know if I'm going to stay here or not. So this was October, November.
Right.
So she was giving, and I think it's very representative of the conversations that I have with members of the younger generation. They don't, like my generation, the baby boomers, they don't wait over 30 years to say, I'm going to see how this goes.
Right.
It's more like 3 months or so, 3 to 6 months, they say, is this really going to work out for me? And what is the measuring stick? Am I going to grow? Are they going to pour into me and develop me, give me an opportunity to grow and make a bigger contribution? And if that's not true, they've been raised by, the schools that they attended, what they've seen happen to their parents and the friends of their parents that say, the employee company contract is different.
Right.
And so whatever I'm going to have, I have to do it based on my skills and abilities and not being part of a company for the rest of my life.
Sure.
So they go into the workplace with the expectation that I'm going to work multiple places in my career.
Right.
This is just my current stop. And when it stops being good for me, I'll move to the next one. So that's a huge thing that companies should pay attention to. Now, I have seen some companies that have done some things, like for instance, they used to recognize tenure in many companies at 15 to 20 years with the company.
Right.
Many companies now have shortened that to that you get something at 5 years.
Right.
And then maybe again at 10 years, but they've dialed back, when you start getting that recognition because they have many young people that they know will not be there
Right.
for
right.
15, 20 years if they don't start showing them some kind of acknowledgement and recognition. So that's when we talk about models around employee engagement. That's one that I think we need to consider, is that social responsibility early, the development and training early,
Right.
shared decision-making, just input. It doesn't mean they have to make the final decision, but at least hear my ideas and let me know that you seriously considered them.
Gotcha. Yeah, so that brings up an interesting way of looking at it, for me at least, is it sounds like employee engagement really means different things to different generations.
Sure.
So if you're at a large company and you have multiple generations, then the engagement or the way you engage someone who's a millennial versus Generation X versus baby boomers may in fact be different.
It could be, and that's really not any different than you differentiate with your customers, right?
Sure.
And so those are the two important groups, your customers and your employees, and they both require a bit of customization. What I am seeing, though, is that even for the more mature generations, they're starting to pay attention to what the younger generations are asking for and getting. So if they're still in the workplace,
Right.
they have become a little more open to asking for what they want because they've seen that it's working for the younger generations. And guess what? They have more experience about how to ask and how to be more engaging when they're asking based on their results, and they've got the track record. So that is starting to, that's why I say that it's good for the generations to be in the workplace because they're learning from each other.
Sure. Yeah, and just to go back to one thing, because this is something I'm more passionate about, which is employee development.
Yeah.
I think one of the items that's critical to ask, it gets seen as a hard cost. You're the manager and you own the P&L, and they say, well, if you want to invest in that, you already have a small budget.
Sure.
You can take it out of that. And part of the conversation that seems to be missed is the cost of not doing that training, or the cost of of continuing the way that things are. And so not just seeing it as that hard cost, but a soft cost that can actually add value back in to offset. You know, when I think in terms of accounting, right, you have the liability and you have the asset, and it gets clumped in this liability sometimes without really having the asset column, you know, ticked off.
Well, let me share with you something that a friend shared with me when we were having a similar conversation. It changed the way I saw employee development. Most employee development is about soft skills. And I used to wish we had something else to call it other than soft skills, because that didn't quite have the impact of, you know, dollars and cents and
Right.
the way they think about, you know, value. And so when we were having this conversation, she said, well, you know, Bev, I kind of like the word soft skills. She said, but if you think about it, think about all the hiring that you've done in your company. And when you post a job and you list the skills, she said probably they're only maybe the first 5 skills that might be functional hard skills.
Right.
Everything else that you're looking for in that candidate is in the soft skills category. And if you look at where companies have missteps, say you take someone that's really good at their job, say they're great at sales, they're wonderful salespeople, and they do really well, have a great, strong track record as a salesperson. So then they say, well, we bet they'd be a great sales manager.
Yeah.
And so they promote that person. Well, they already know how to sell, so they go in and they want to do exactly what they did as a salesperson, and they want everybody on their team to do that.
Right.
But the skills they don't have is how do you give people the goal and let them, based on their own strengths, figure out how to get to the goal. That is
Sure.
soft skills. And that's where most management fails. And a little later, we're going to talk about how important it is. What are the key drivers for employee engagement? The number one key driver is their relationship with their direct manager. And that one by itself is a huge, it's one of those pass-fail
Right.
kinds of tests for
Right.
employees. And so when you hear employees, many times, I am in so many conversations at every level where they say, you know what, I really like the company, I believed in it, but the person I report to, it just didn't work for me, so I left.
Sure.
So I think, you know, when you look at what actually happens in the workplace, the soft skills training is what makes the difference, because most people get promoted based on their functional skills,
Yeah. Exactly.
but they fail because their lack of soft skills, and that is clearly an employee development issue.
Yep. Very good. What else would you like to cover in this session?
Well, I think that, you know, I just want to wrap it up by talking about, again, having a culture of engagement and really looking at what that means for you and your company, because it's different from company to company. And the one thing I would suggest to companies is that they make their employees a partner in the development of that process. Ask for their input, because they really want to tell you, but you have to make sure that they feel like you really want to know.
Yeah, and that you're willing to do something with the results.
Exactly,
Yeah.
exactly.
Well, very good. Okay, so very good. So we've talked a lot about the importance of employee engagement, companies that are trying to do the right thing, and follow up on the idea that employees are their most valuable asset. Now, on the other hand, businesses are in the business of making money, right? So they want to help the employee and do things. They also want to drive their bottom line, because ultimately you help your employees and communities by having a viable company. And so tell us a little bit about the results that people are seeing or that they could expect with better engagement models.
I think that they are varied depending on the company, but some of the things I've personally seen, based on some of the things we talked about employees wanting more training, they want to feel listened to and contribute ideas. Companies that have suggestion programs are reaping the benefits of that, because employees know that the company wants their innovative ideas and they're willing to try them. So they are many times reaping the benefits by creating new products based on employee input. I also see there are a couple of stories that I could tell you that show you what happens when they don't talk to their employees. And the one that has stuck with me for years is the story of a company where they were having a problem with a lot of returned items. So they were shipping
Right.
products to customers. and they were having a lot of them broken. It was a sharp increase, and they couldn't figure out how, so why that was happening. So they hired a consultant. And the story was actually shared with me by the consultant. And so he said, well, you know, he went to the company, he met with the CEO, and he said, you know, we're having all this breakage now, and it's costing us more money. We've had a sharp increase. And he said, so we want you to figure out, you know, why that's happening and help us reverse that trend. So he said, I left the CEO's office and I went to the mailroom. And he said they had a woman named Betty in the mailroom that had been there for over 20-something years. And he said, I asked Betty if I could buy her a cup of coffee. And she said, sure. So over coffee, he said to Betty, he said, you know, you've been here a long time, and I hear you all are having a problem with, you know, increased breakage. And she said, oh, yeah. She said, they changed the packaging, and that's what caused the breakage. And so he said, well, what do you mean? And so she went into detail about the way the packaging used to work and how they didn't have very much breakage, and then they had this idea to change the packaging, and they went to this new packaging without, you know, really testing it a lot. And that's when all the breakage started. And she said, oh, yeah, we get tons of those back now, and they're breaking, and we have to reship it, and the next one breaks. And so she said, it's just, but it's the packaging. She said if they, you know, either go back to the old packaging or come up with something different that has the benefits of the old packaging, that would all go away. So he goes back up to the CEO and said, well, the problem is the packaging. And his whole point was, they just paid me, he said they wrote me a big check for figuring out what was wrong. It cost me a cup of coffee, talking to their employee that had been there for over 20 years. And so that's, I think, the opportunity for companies to really thrive because they have good employee engagement. They're talking to the people closest to the work. So I've seen that happen. So suggestions for new products or new customer processes. And I've seen empowerment. You hear that word thrown around a lot, but what does that really look like when it's operationalized? And so you hear often, Southwest Airlines is a great example, where their employees, and when you talk to the some of the former leadership that are now retired but still very active in Southwest, they say they created a culture of doing the right things, not necessarily the right way. And one of the most engaging stories that made the news as an example of that was, and Southwest didn't tell the story, the customer actually did. There was a man who was a grandfather. And he got a very disturbing call from his daughter one day that said his grandson, her son, had been seriously hurt and was not expected to live. And he needed to get from where he was to California as quickly as he could so he could say goodbye to him. And so keep in mind, this is after 9/11, so security and so he literally calls and says, I need to be on the next flight going to California. How can I do that? He had no ticket. He had no reservation or anything. Nothing had been done ahead. So the Southwest Airlines reservationist said, start toward the airport. We'll figure it out. So she took her own credit card, which they're not supposed to do, because supposedly after 9/11, you can't make a reservation for someone else, but you also can't make it like just a few minutes before the flight leaves, because think of from a terrorism perspective, that's not a good thing, right? And so he was about 20 minutes from the airport. They had a flight that was supposed to leave in 18 minutes. So the reservationist calls the airplane and says, let me speak to the pilot. She tells the pilot the situation. She said, we'll take care of getting the ticket and everything. So she charges the ticket to her credit card because she didn't even get his last name. So she had to make up a name, charge it to her credit card, get him a ticket. And so the pilot said, we'll make sure that we wait. Now, keep in mind, the airlines don't wait for somebody, right? They push off from the gate no matter what. And so there were about 3 or 4 Southwest employees that made sure that he got on that plane. The pilot went out and told the passengers that were already seated on the plane, we have an emergency. We're going to be a little bit late. We're asking you to be patient. This is a very serious situation, or we wouldn't be doing it. And so I'll let you know we're not going to be very late, but we're going to be a little late leaving. So everybody was fine. When the grandfather got to the airplane, he was literally out of breath and he could not believe that the plane was there waiting for him. And he said to the pilot, he said, "I can't believe that you waited for me." And the pilot said, "We weren't going anywhere without you." So the end of the story is that he made it to California in time to say goodbye to his grandfather. Now, the empowerment part is not one Southwest employee told anybody in management about that story. The grandfather, after his grandson had passed and that the funeral was passed, he wrote a letter to Southwest and said, "Here's what happened. I can't believe it, but it is priceless to me what you allowed me to do." And so it was one of the executives, Colleen Barrett, that was telling the story. And she said they heard about it on the news like everybody else from the grandfather and reporting it. And she said they were so proud of their employees because they did the right thing. She said, "Now, we've still got to unravel some of the paperwork and
Sure.
all that's okay." She said, "But we were proud that our people trusted each other enough to make the right thing happen for our customer." That is such an amazing story of employee engagement and empowerment and a company culture that said to them, it's okay when you're doing the right thing,
Yeah.
not to follow the exact protocol.
Yeah, exactly. That was the part I was picking up on, is the culture.
Yes,
To know that you're empowered, but also to trust other people outside of your immediate group to also be
Exactly.
empowered.
yes, because there were different groups, there were reservations, there was the flight attendant, there was the pilot, all of those people had to come together to get that man where he needed to be, and he was a customer. And none of them even thought about telling anybody after the fact. It was him. No one would have ever known that it even happened because they just saw it as part of doing their everyday job. So that's one example of what happens when you have a culture of employee engagement, is employees feel empowered to take care of their customers.
Right.
And so that's what you really want to see in the workplace, is when employees feel valued, they in turn value the customer. And that returns profit, it returns brand reputation. And think about, most companies, especially larger companies, they really do look at what is the value of our brand. They have companies that monitor that.
Sure.
And so when you have a brand like a Southwest or an IBM or AT&T, all of those things are important. And who makes up that brand? It's the everyday employee on the front line taking care of the customers. So it's hard to beat that for a return on investment.
Yeah, I agree. It's interesting as you're talking. There's a certain amount of trust.
Sure.
I was just reading an article last week that said, yeah, more employee engagement tools are great, but it can't measure the fact that this employee still needs to be engaged.
Yes.
Engagement is a relationship. It's not some checkbox or some form you're filling out or whatever. It's a manager sitting down with the direct report and having conversations just like we are right now, and understanding where they both contribute, how they can help,
Sure.
and building a sense of trust so that when the employee walks away, they're like, I see how I can contribute, and I'm empowered to make those decisions, and I trust my manager is going to back me up.
Yes, and that is very important. You talk about trust. That's a whole topic unto itself. And you see trust or the lack of trust at every level, and it colors everything in an organization, because employees don't do their best when they second guess themselves. Or think of the time lost from a productivity standpoint when everyone is covering their tracks.
Right.
Right? They're triple documenting things to make sure if somebody asks about this, I can prove that I went through these 15 steps that, before I did anything, because I wanted to make sure that they knew I followed protocol. And so it's a huge waste of time.
I get these emails where it's sent to me, but I see that the person has copied themselves
Yes,
on the email.
sure.
Then, as I'm opening the email, it pops up a little box saying, this person has requested a return receipt. And I'm thinking, and I know it's not me, because
Sure.
many times I'm just getting to know this person, but I just look at the amount of having to cover oneself
Yeah.
that's embedded in a lot of cultures, and it's just not going
such a
to
time
get you where you
waster.
want to be.
Well, the other thing that makes me think about is having, as part of your culture, from a leadership perspective, a culture that ask employees to tell you the truth and be okay with hearing it.
Right.
So many companies aren't even working on the right problems because the employees see the problems, especially those at the frontline level. They see what the issues are. They hear from the customers what they're complaining about, and they also hear the things the customers love about their product or service. But too often, when a new idea comes from the top, without input from those that are implementing the change, it's not the best idea.
Yeah.
But people are hesitant to say anything about it. They just salute the flag and march forward. And then there's so much resource, time, money, people that are thrown at it. And then 6 months, a year later, it fizzles.
Yeah. It's interesting. I've been in that scenario many times. And it's not that people aren't willing to say things. It's after the first or second time that they
Sure.
got ignored or just told, no, we're not going to do
Sure.
that they just say fine.
Yeah.
So they see it all day long. And I've seen it where the people on the street, the ones that know what the problem are, they bubble it up to the manager, and the manager does not want to relay that information up the
Sure.
chain, and so
Sure.
it gets left off, and so only until it turns into an escalation
Sure.
from someone higher who says I need to drill down and see all the way at that level, that finally those types of things get brought up.
Let me share with you where it shows up at the customer level. That probably the leadership in the company never knows about it unless they happen to somehow know someone that's had this experience. It's happened to me several times where I go in, or even on the phone where I'm interacting, trying to complete a transaction. And without me even asking, the employee starts telling me what a horrible place that is to work. And I'm just trying to complete a transaction. It's happened to me in person. It happened to me probably about a month ago. I was running an errand for my sister, actually, where she had left something, and it was closer for me to run pick it up and keep it for her than
Right.
for her to go back and get it. So she gave me the instruction, gave me the name of the person that I was to talk to when I got there, and they would know where to show me. It was her power cord to her phone.
Okay.
So I run by, have never seen this person ever in life. And so I go in and I introduce myself, and I said, I'm here to pick up the power cord. And so she said, oh, are you on your way to work? And I said, no, actually, I have my own company. And so she said, well, what do you do? And so I told her that I was a coach. And so she said, oh, she said, that sounds wonderful. I said, but I worked for many years for a company and retired a couple of years ago. She said, I'm trying to get there. She said, it sounds so wonderful. She said, I've been here 10 years and I just hate it. She said, I only enjoyed the first 2 years that I worked here. And she said, I just need to get away. Now, I mean, literally, we are standing in the foyer.
You
of
have
this
one of
company.
those faces, apparently.
Yes. And I'm thinking, oh, my goodness. And she just keeps going on, and she's like, oh, I probably need to talk to you. And I'm really serious. She said, I just absolutely hate it. And I'm thinking, I could have been a customer. I could have been anybody, but she was so burdened
Right.
by what she felt and that lack of commitment to company that we talked about in an earlier segment, that she had to just get, and it just tumbled. And when I walked away to go back to my car, I kept thinking, how tragic, because she's probably not told anybody that she's feeling this disconnection and desperation. That's what it felt like. And she's not the first one I've experienced where, I've gone into department stores and had, someone tell me, well, we don't get Saturdays off unless we get an account opened. And so if you could open an account, I haven't had a Saturday off in, it is just, you're thinking, oh my, and I was a customer. I was there
Right.
buying something.
Right. You're
And-
like, I don't think I should be knowing this.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So I just see when you talk about the benefit to companies, you have to also look at the cost of not having engagement and not having employees that feel valued or acknowledged by the company, because they too are impacting. And if they can't tell the company, who do they tell? They tell the company's customers.
Right,
Or
right.
the first person that comes along that looks like safe. Oh, I'll never see this person again. I can be honest with them and tell them that this is not really a good place to work.
Yeah. Well, that reminds me of one of the statistics that in the breaks we were talking
Sure.
about turnover.
Sure.
Do you have that?
Yeah, it is, it's pretty stunning that they have over 22% of the people only 22% are planning to stay in their job. The others are looking for other jobs already.
And that was over a certain time
Over
period?
and it was over 618,000 global employees that they surveyed. And so if you do the math on that, and you look at the cost of turnover, which is usually at least 1.5 times their salary, to get a new person in, train them, get them ramped up, and get them really top productive, it's a monumental cost. And frankly, that's one of the things that I look at when I engage with a company and ask them, what's your voluntary attrition? Because there are some things where, companies look for new skills
Sure.
and those kind of things, but voluntary attrition is a really, really good indicator of what's going on in a company. And one tool that companies have stopped using as much that I think was an excellent tool is the exit interview. Having someone not in their chain of command,
Right.
whether it's HR or some different group, interview the people that are leaving where it was voluntary, and just asking them, is there anything we could do to retain people like you? So it may
Sure.
be too late for them, but over time, you can gather data that says, here's some trends that we might need to look at. It's not so much that you're looking at the individual situation, because that might not be as instructive, but if you are looking for trends over time, when you do these exit interviews, those trends will show themselves and show you where you need to really focus to reduce your voluntary attrition.
So let's recap a little bit on this section because it's important. Employee engagement leads to results,
Sure.
positive results. On the flip side, not having employees engaged does have a cost.
Absolutely.
It's not always a hard cost that you can measure, but there's
Absolutely.
definitely a cost, as you pointed out, to the probably to within their team,
Sure.
to the productivity, as well as to the customer, as you found out
Yeah.
unwillingly a few
Yes,
times.
yes.
So, and it still baffles me. I think it was something like 22% still wanted to stay employed at that place over the next 2 or 3 years, or something like that.
Sure.
Is that what it was?
Sure, let me look at the actual statistics so that I could tell you that. So only 22% of employees plan on staying in their current positions. Only 22%. And that was out of the 618,000 global employees. So this is not just a North America
Right,
problem.
right.
This is a global statement. And I think it's shocking that it's so low, 22%. 50% wouldn't have been great, but 22% is alarming.
Yeah, and if you think about it, that means, if your average 80% of your current workforce does not plan on staying where
Sure.
it's at. So the question you have to ask yourself is, how hard are they working on
Yeah,
behalf of the company?
sure,
And
sure.
how much of that 80% is preventable through some of these very means,
Sure.
not being well engaged, not having their opinion asked for, things like that.
Well, there are some other tools that companies can use. One that I found, some of them are just really conversational, where managers are encouraged to really ask some questions of employees to get their true feelings. And one that we used to use was something called Fit for You, where it was a conversation from manager and employee to ask the employee what was important to them. For instance, if I said to you that we were going to give you some monetary award, for some people, monetary award is significant if it's $50. For others, it's $500 for it to be significant. And for some, it's not money at all. It is public recognition of some accomplishment.
Sure.
Right? So everything is not about money, is really the message. But having to customizing that to the employee makes a big difference. I'll give you an example from my own experience. When I was leading one of the teams that I led, I had someone on the team that was a stellar performer. Year after year after year after year. And what they really wanted was more vacation time. Because they had family in other places, it was really important to them to be there for family holidays and those
Right.
kind of things. And so what we really worked out is that when I had, as a manager, you had the opportunity to give an additional 10 days of vacation without checking with anybody. Say for someone who's getting married or they had some significant life event, you could do that. But you really could use it for anything to recognize an employee. It could have been a once-in-a-lifetime trip where maybe they only had a week's vacation,
Right.
and it was, giving them an extra week would have really made that special. And so for this employee, when I asked them what was significant, what could I do to recognize their accomplishment, it was really giving them not just vacation time, sometimes it was vacation time, but what they really wanted was the flexibility to work from this other location occasionally, which their job allowed them to do. All they needed
Sure.
was a computer. And I knew that this was an employee that worked just as hard, no matter where they were. They always did above and beyond what they were expected to do. And so it was really such an easy thing as a manager to say yes to, that meant worlds to the employee.
So you didn't have to hire a consultant to
Didn't
come
have to
talk
hire,
to your
no,
employee?
because I asked the employee.
And it
what-
wasn't a
what-
survey or some
Exactly.
industry thing? You just had a
Exactly.
conversation?
Exactly. And here's an example, too, of the reverse, where I felt really badly. I had an employee that I wanted to do something, a small recognition for. And so we had these designated parking places where, be Employee of the Month and
Okay.
that kind of thing. And so I gave her the Employee of the Month parking space. And when I did that, she said, "Oh, Bev, I don't drive to work every day. My husband drops me off." And I thought, oh, I should have known that, right? But, and I should have asked some questions before I gave her
Right,
that
right.
award, because it wasn't meaningful. And so I came up with something later for that, but I felt like that's something that awkwardness I could have avoided if I had just asked some questions before I did
Right,
that.
right.
Because I wanted it to be a positive thing, and then it just turned into an awkward thing.
Sure.
And so it taught me again the importance of getting to know your employees a little bit beyond just what they do when they get to the office.
What else would you like to cover in this section?
Well, I think we just want to wrap it up by saying really exactly what you stated before, is that employee engagement can be a benefit and if you have it, and if you don't have it, it's a cost. And some people think it's a soft cost, but I submit to you that the cost is very hard when you start looking at the dollars you spend on recruiters, on lost productivity, on increased training, all those things that really have a hard dollar cost that your turnover makes happen for you if you don't pay attention to employee
Sure.
engagement. So I
Sure.
think the smart company knows that their employees are their most important asset, and the care and feeding of those employees so that they retain them is a really smart business strategy.
Very good. So, welcome back. We've covered a lot today, and it's interesting. I think, like you, I could probably talk about this for hours. So that being said, let's talk a little bit about what drives employee engagement.
Well, there are many factors that drive employee engagement, but there are three that stick out that I think if companies focus on those three, that the other things will kind of evolve and take care of themselves. And we've talked about one a little bit already, but it is the big one, which is their relationship with their direct manager. And so for companies to understand that the person that is the pulse of their company to their employees, it is their direct manager. And so the way they feel about that engagement and commitment to company is directly influenced by how good a relationship they have with that direct manager. When they've surveyed groups and groups of employees, one of the things that they say is that they really want mentoring from their manager. They see them as someone that they want to learn from, both formally and informally, just in their day-to-day interactions.
Right.
And so if there's not a feeling of this person that is my official connection to the company, that they're not involved in my development personally or care about my development personally, that my experience is probably not going to be a good one over time. And so that either helps them be more committed to the company or less committed to the company, because they always say that people leave people, not companies.
Right, and I completely agree with that. I've written something down several years ago, having had experience both sides of that. And the statement, or the way that I phrase it, is that your manager is the face of the company to you.
Sure.
And so when I was in companies that were downsizing, and there was so much infighting, but I had a great manager,
Sure.
even though in the papers and in the culture, it was really difficult to work there. My manager treated me well, and I still stayed at the company far longer than my peers.
Sure.
On the flip side, I've been at the companies where, oh, you know, top 25 places to work, and everybody just talks about how wonderful it is, but your manager and you just don't get along, or there's no connection, or there's not trust. And I think, well, despite all that, this is what I know of the company, and I'm not staying.
Yeah, it is about your individual experience, and the reputation of the company is translated through the manager. So they really are your pulse to the company. And I just can't state that enough. And every piece of research I've ever looked in my entire life supports that very statement, is that it just will not work unless you have a reasonable, it doesn't have to be perfect, but unless you feel like there's something for you to gain from that manager. Conversely, I have certainly seen it where they get off on the wrong foot and the employee decides very early on, it's no sense in me even investing in this
Sure.
because this first experience is not a pleasant one. Now, what I often talk to employees about, though, is that you don't get to pick your manager. There are other things that you can, sometimes if you have a manager that's not the most effective leader, it also helps you develop coping skills, but that you have to decide where that balance is. And so that's an individual decision. But that's the number one driver of employee engagement. The second one is belief in senior leadership. Even though that you may not have as much day-to-day interaction with them, you really need to believe that the health of the company is in good hands, because this is your livelihood. It trickles
Right.
down.
Right.
And you also want to be part of a company that has what I call reputation capital, where when people mention the name of your company, you sit up a little straighter and you
Right,
say,
right.
I work for that company, and you're proud to say that. Conversely, you know, I have a friend who worked for many years for a tobacco company. And because of when all of the things, and she was very successful in this company, and that was where most of her professional career was spent. But over time, as all of the conversations about the health of smokers came up, when someone asked her where she worked, she'd say she worked in consumer goods.
Yeah.
Right? And that was the most, unless someone asked her specifically the name of her company, she never volunteered it. Now, they are still a very successful company, but that just gives you an example of how, you know, that reputation capital can
Sure,
be.
pride.
Yes, exactly. To say that I work for, you know, sometimes a nonprofit people, or like my son works for Habitat for Humanities. He's very excited to share with people the impact that they have on lives,
Right.
and giving homes to people. They just had President Carter in town for Habitat for America, and he got to meet the president, and so that reputation capital and the trust in senior leadership is really important, that they have the best interests of the company at heart. And then the third thing is that they want to know that the company is going to be someplace that they can grow and contribute. You know, so that really is important. The growth piece, especially for the younger generation, it is something, growth and feedback. Those are the two things that distinguish that generation from the other generations in the workplace. And the feedback doesn't have to be positive. They just want to know, how do I keep improving?
Right.
So if no one's telling them that, they feel like you're not invested in their continued growth and development. And you have to keep in mind that this generation is the one that says my skills are my competitive edge. And so in order for me to be, my security, if there is one, it is such a thing anymore, is in my continuing to grow and add skills. And if I'm not doing that, then I'm not in a place that's going to help me stay competitive.
Sure, and a lot of the culture around technology, they grew up more with technology.
Sure.
And a lot of that gives you instant feedback.
Sure.
You're used to doing something, and then something appears or reappears,
Sure.
or someone acts
Yeah.
and reacts. So yeah,
So
it makes sense.
those are the things that are like the most important three things for employee engagement. There are many other subcategories, but I think if companies focus on those three, and from a senior leadership perspective, it's the communication with the employees. I think one of the most effective, you know, I worked for a large company that for a long time, and so I was there for some of the really big highs and some of the really big lows.
Sure.
And what I saw and learned as a leader when I watched our CEO that came in when things were in, disarray, what I saw him do was engage the employees. Number one, he started referring to us as colleagues. Every note started out, not dear employees, not dear team, but dear colleagues. And I think that language made such a difference because even though most of us would probably never meet him, you felt like he was talking to you as a team member,
Right.
even though he had a different role. And so everything was about dear colleagues. The other thing I saw him do that was really important, that gave me some view into his philosophy of senior leadership, was he talked about how important it was that we viewed our competition as being outside our walls and not between us. That was huge because we were such a huge company, and we sometimes had policies that caused us to compete against
Sure.
each other.
Sure.
And he made it hard for us to do that by some of the things he put in place that just didn't make any sense for us to do that. And he continued to talk about the fact that our competition was outside our walls and started reinventing the company in that way. He also said to us as a company that we're only going to compete in markets where we can be number one or number two. And so we were going to strip away, but he gave us a direction. We knew where he was taking us so that we could figure out what was our part to play in that. That's that empowerment piece. And he started to reinstill and undergird the pride we had in saying that we worked for that company. And that was palpable. I mean, it was really, really palpable. The other thing that he did, and most of our leaders have done, even though the company was over 400,000 employees and still is, they made it feel small. So when Katrina hit, and we had employees that were impacted, when 9/11 happened, and we had employees that were impacted, within, less than an hour, we got communications that said, we've identified where every employee is. Here are the things they need. We're going to take care of them, but if you want to do something for your employees, here's a list of things that you could do.
Right.
It made it feel like you knew all the people, even though they were another part of the world. You as a fellow colleague had one, you knew the company was taking care of them, and two, if you wanted to do something personal, they told you how you could make a difference.
Sure.
So that really solidified that whole team and colleague experience, and it made you feel like you were a part of something that was major in the world, and that the products and services you were offering to customers were going to make a positive difference. So you stayed engaged, as I did for 38 years.
Yeah, the undertone, to get back to stuff we talked about earlier, is just you have an emotional connection.
Absolutely.
And that it
Absolutely.
can't be contrived.
Sure.
And it's not just through an email. It's something that permeates you, and it comes from direct relationships with your managers, the people around you, and the company.
Yes, and and I've certainly talked to people that have been with other companies for a long time, and I think that that's fairly common for companies that do that well, that even if they go to another company or they retire, they always have some connection to that former company.
Right.
Because they had an emotional commitment and connection to that, and the people there. It's the people that make the company, and that's who the connection is with. And so when companies are able to do that, their employees stay engaged. And what they have to think about is even the employees that choose to leave may be customers. So that's an even bigger reason that even when people choose a different path because they think it's better for them long-term, they may end up being your customer. So you still want them to have a good experience with your brand.
Right.
So I think and I think, probably the thing that we can end with, Mike, is to just let me share some of the tips for
Okay.
employee engagement. And I
Perfect.
really want to refer to these to get them right. We've talked about some of them, but one is that senior leadership must articulate a clear vision to all employees. I just described to you what it was like working in a company with over 400,000 people, but feeling like I got the same message each of us did about where we were going as a company. And so our senior leadership was consistent in the way they communicated to us and the way they shared where they were taking us so we could figure out what our part was. The second one is that employees should be encouraged to communicate openly and influence the company's vision throughout their input. That is so key. Again, it's that, what can I do in my role? You know, there's the bigger vision, but if I can't figure out where I play my piece, then it's not fulfilling to me.
Sure.
And I'll give you an example of a game that we used to play that I think represents this point very well. In the early 90s, when the company needed to go through a transformation, they gave training to every leadership employee to prepare us for the transformation. And one of the games we played was we had to construct a puzzle as a team. Mm-hmm. And so they dump out all of the pieces of the puzzle in just a random fashion. It was a big puzzle. And then there were probably sometimes as many as 20, 30 people that had to put this puzzle together as a team. What we learned by that is when we just jumped in on this pile of puzzle pieces and started trying to figure it out, it was really difficult until someone spotted that they had put the box top with a picture of the completed puzzle in the room somewhere for us to see, to discover. They didn't tell us, look at this box top and it'll help you. They just put it somewhere in the room. But once we found that puzzle, which represented the vision, we each know where to play our piece then. Somebody said, oh, I've got borders to the puzzle. And so maybe I can put the borders in first and that'll help you all fill in the rest of the pieces. And by looking at the vision, which was the completed puzzle, we could see where the green colors were, and we'd say, I have a green piece, so my piece goes with these other green pieces. And it really helped us put the puzzle together quicker and be more efficient and effective in the way we did it as a team.
Sure.
So that's what it means when senior leadership shares the vision and employees can figure out, where do I play my piece, right? So that's number 2. Direct managers should foster healthy relationships with their employees. And healthy is, you know, it's individual. And what I've seen happen really very effectively is when managers show themselves to be smart in the business, but human. They aren't perfect. They make mistakes. Many times, leaders think they have to appear perfect to their employees and that they have all the answers. What I've seen be more effective is when they say, we've got problem A, how do we solve it together? Give me your ideas, I'll give you my ideas, and then we'll choose what the best solutions are for this problem. So that's more of a healthy manager-employee relationship, as opposed to a manager that says, we're gonna always do it my way. And then people feel shut down, they don't feel valued for their input and their expertise, and that they're not growing as well, so that doesn't help. Senior leadership should continuously demonstrate that employees have an impact on their work environment, especially for the younger generations and probably the generation before them, the Gen Xers. I think that's really important. What I've seen happen, think about the workplace environments that have changed. For instance, in my company, we used to be, you know, blue suits and white shirts and ties, and everything was, you're squared away. And now you can go to some of our locations. Most of our locations are business casual at the request of our customers. Our customers are business casual. So what they say to employees is mirror the dress code for your customer. If you're going to a formal customer meeting and you need to wear business dress, fine. But you make the decision about what your work environment dictates. In some workplaces now, you will see that they have foosball tables and ping pong tables, and you know, and it's just a completely different environment. Certainly, the Googles of the world have made a difference in the way that that they are approaching the workplace. And I remember in our company it was a big deal when we started having events in the evening, and they actually had beer. You know, that was a huge change for us that we never, you know, 20, 30 years ago would have even thought of, and the founder of the company certainly never envisioned. But the workplace and marketplace is dictating something different now, so they just need to keep that in mind. So here's the main one. Managers should show employees that they are valued as true contributors, give them a sense of empowerment. So throughout all of these segments, we've had that theme of empowerment. But here's how it benefits companies, much to the Southwest story about employees just getting it done without having to think about, what do I need to take care of me? They can take care of the customer. Employees that have creative ideas for products. Probably one of the best stories I heard about that is that once a new employee was walking through a building, and they noticed this person sitting in an empty room, except for a table and chair, and they were just staring out a window. And so later, they come back through and they see the same employee just staring out a window. And finally, they asked the person that was giving them a tour of the facility. They said, "What is he doing in that room? He's doing the same thing he was doing earlier." And they said, well, the company was 3M.
Okay.
And they said, he's working actually, that he was the person that came up with the sticky note,
Oh, okay.
right? And they pay him to just sit there and think, right? Because think of when you didn't have sticky notes. And it was something he came up with just by thinking about something he thought would be useful, and it was an accidental discovery. But they followed his innovative idea, and look what has happened. Everybody knows what a sticky note is. And think of how many they've sold. And so they thought it was a good investment to just let him think.
So that sounds like a good strategy for my next job. You're going to pay me to sit in a room and stare,
Yeah,
and I'll come up with stuff.
yeah.
But no, I hear you.
Yeah, but that thinking thing is really important because here's what happens in companies. We're really good doers and not necessarily good planners and thinkers. We really are geared to do. So we feel more valuable. We feel more appreciated, more visible sometimes when we're doing. But to just do and not think and plan sometimes leads to us doing the wrong thing for way too long, and it's expensive. And in fact, the Thomas Watson Sr., the founder of IBM, what was our most important slogan early on? It was think, just that one word, think. And he thought that was important for employees and leaders to just give themselves time to think, and that would benefit the company because they would come up with better solutions for customers. So I think that as we've talked about employee engagement, that it is the foundation of a company's success, and those that do it well are the ones that are built to last.
Well, I appreciate your time today. It's an excellent topic. I'm sure we could to go further on it and hope to do that maybe in the future.
I've enjoyed the conversation, Mike. Thank you.